Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.
All right, it's Thursday night and we're going to talk rugby. As you've heard, I'm delighted to say Brian O'Driscoll joins us on the line. Evening, Brian.
Hi Adrian, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. A lot to get to, and the games will come to in a few moments, but there's only one place really to start. It's been the talk of rugby circles all week, and I might just do a bit of a brief summary for people playing catch-up on this, and we'll get your thoughts on it then. But an announcement earlier in the week that 8, for now, former pro rugby players were taking a class action lawsuit against, for now, World Rugby, the RFU and the Welsh Union, and the expectation that number is going to grow rapidly. Steve Thompson and Alex Popham spoke out about their own heartbreaking stories during the week as well. They're in their early 40s, diagnosed with early onset dementia, and how that's going to eat through them and through their families over the years to come was truly heartbreaking stuff for anybody who saw it or watched it or read about it during the week. Johnny Watterson then reporting during the week that permission had been sought from up to 10 Irish players to be included in that group lawsuit. Who they are and what their conditions are remains unknown at the minute, but the IRFU saying that they've had no contact as yet, although it seems inevitable now given the numbers that involved, that this will grow and it will impact on Irish players. The group behind the action in the UK is saying that the players, including the 10 from Ireland, are showing symptoms of neurological complications, and their email saying that they believe that this is an epidemic. So with all that, Brian, and hopefully that brings us up to speed on it, there's been much talk around the WhatsApp groups that you've been in this week, or much talk amongst former pro rugby players about it?
Yeah, of course. There's been a bit. There's, I happened to be talking to Keith Wood earlier on. I didn't realise he was on the show this morning, and I was chatting to him about it. I guess my BT WhatsApp group has been pretty hot with information, and to understand, trying to get a sense as to who the other players are involved. I think that first and foremost are, when you've played with and against some of these players and you realise how they're suffering now, it's pretty stark, and reality kind of really sets in that some of us feel very lucky that we've gotten away from the game relatively unscathed, whereas not the case with some people by the sounds of things. And to consider early signs of dementia in your 40s is pretty unthinkable. So first of all, I think rather than worrying about future-proofing the game or anything else along those lines, your kind of thoughts are with those players and their families and their kids, and what the future holds for them. I guess there's so many different components to this. I think one of the most important things to get out and say early and kind of put on the record is that the game now, comparatively to the time that a lot of these players played in, is vastly different from a diagnosis point of view. And what was acceptable 15, 20 years ago is very much not the case. I think you can see now from my early parts of my playing career of players putting a big shot or getting hit and then stumbling and getting up into the defensive line, and roars from the crowd and slaps on the back from their teammates, and commentators saying what heroes they are. That is a thing of the past, thankfully. Yeah. Whereas now you change, replace that with players from the opposition stopping the referee because a player is clearly knocked out or has been concussed or is in danger to being trampled on in the next phase of play, and players protect the opposition. Such do they realise the severity of these injuries. So I think we've come a hell of a long way from where the players that are involved in this lawsuit, the time that they've played into the game that we're watching, and those that are playing it now, and being involved in are the sense of feeling that they have. So I think it's important to associate and compartmentalize the two of those. It doesn't mean that the game is still a very physical, confrontational game, and there will always be elements of unsafety in the game. It's not a safe game per se. If you want to go and play something safe, don't play a contact sport. But there's also lots of upsides to this that always get forgotten when terrible news like this comes out. And I think it's always important in these conversations to give balance in the conversation.
Yeah, and there is so much to it, both on the sort of empathetic side, obviously, in terms of the two lads, and like you said, you would have played with, or toured briefly, obviously, with Steve in 2005, and would have played against Alex Popham, I'm sure, regularly as well. Obviously, when you watch that stuff, when you're looking at it, is there, like, the likes of me is looking at it with a sharp intake of breath, and I think it takes a hard person not to watch it and not have a tear in your eye watching a lot of the coverage and the interviews that have been out there this week. Are you looking at it thinking, I mean, I know you've spoken to us before about you haven't picked up a huge amount of concussions over the course of your career, but like, are you acutely aware that obviously that could easily be you, or it could be easily any of your colleagues that would have, like, that overlap of career it's a pretty similar time frame?
Yeah, I think you are acutely aware, and yeah, I again, I probably was diagnosed with concussion 3 times in my career on the basis of what concussions are perceived to be nowadays. Would it have been slightly higher than that? I would probably say yes. And anytime a peer, is suffering the way that these guys are, does it make you sit up and wonder about yourself, about the future a little bit? It does. I'd be lying if I said it doesn't. But I don't lie awake at night thinking about it. At the moment, I feel very good and feel in the whole of my health, and long may that continue. But the reality is that, these guys, Michael Littman, I read an article. It probably first became apparent to me about a month or 6 weeks ago when I read an article in, I think it was The Australian, with Michael Littman, and he was talking about early dementia. And then you kind of start reading into what's entailed, loss of temper, changing of mood, huge mood swings, and so you're trying to almost discount any of the things that you think might be relevant to you. Because you've played at that time, because I was involved in lots of collisions, because maybe you're a little bit looser than maybe you might be now with the experience of life behind you, throwing yourself into tackles and into collisions like there was no tomorrow. Those things you live in the moment, but when you have the hindsight of looking back, you kind of go, gosh, there was some mad stuff out there.
Well, you were an alpha man for that. Like, I mean, the players that you mentioned obviously were in a certain part of the pitch that you weren't, but like, you were regularly in there going at it. I wonder, like, is there in terms of the Irish aspect of it, because that's where the spotlight is obviously going to turn now for us, and they say that there are some players that have been contacted about this. Is there? Would you, when you read about it and you hear the number of concussive incidents that the likes of Steve Thompson would have had, like, I mean, they're phenomenal in terms of the numbers. Would that have rung bells for you, for players you would have seen that you played alongside, or have players been in touch this week, or you've been in touch with players to get a sense of, and obviously you won't, but no names required, but that of people that may have been impacted by this?
Well, I think concussions are a very personal thing from the point of view that different players deal with them and get different symptoms from them. I was very fortuitous in that my 3 concussions, I had no adverse effects immediately. So knocked out as a teenager, playing schools. That was the only time I think I lost consciousness, playing Leinster schools. And I was playing down in Musgrave Park, and someone came on and asked me where I was, and I told them I was in Murrayfield, and I had no sense of any of the calls. And I remember Andy Dunn was my out half, and he was making a call, and I had no idea what that play was. And I was trying to bluff my way through. I was like, yeah, just hit me with the ball, because I didn't actually know what the play entailed. And then after a couple of seconds, he realized that I was away with the fairies, and he said, you got to go. So I got subbed off, and I think I sat out. I don't think I played the following week, but I may have played 2 weeks later. I can't exactly remember. And then another time would have been on the Lions tour in 2009 in the second test. No doubt, that was probably one of the more dangerous times. Considering I got a bad knock early on in the game, and then the second collision against Danny Rousseau probably reinforced what was already probably a concussion. So I guess I look back on that one and the stupidity from my own personal point of view of not protecting myself. But I think the medics were oblivious to the fact that I had a head knock, because in the first collision, I think Gethin Jenkins had smashed his face, and so the focus was with them on that tackle, and I suppose I got away from it, and I was able to take my breather, and there was a bit of a delay in play, and I suppose I came round a bit more to the point of being able to play on. But as I said, the next day, I felt a bit groggy that night, but the next day I was brand new, and it was decided that I wouldn't play in the third test, but it kind of felt as though I had the potential to do so. But there's other circumstances where, there was felt that there was missed concussions. The one against France in my second final year, again, another situation where the doc was dragged away somewhere else. And I managed to I think I got asked where I was, and I knew I was in the Aviva, and asked the scoreline, and I could see it over his shoulder, and I kind of got away with it. But then, I think he was very annoyed that one slipped through the net. And so when I got concussed against New Zealand in the game we lost in that last couple of minutes, as soon as I came on, I knew when I was coming off the pitch for HIA, he wasn't going to let me on again. So you put your hands you put your faith in the hands of the doctors, and we're lucky that we have some of the best medics around, so much experience, and we value their opinions, and that's why the decision must be taken from the player. You will always want to soldier on with your teammates. You'll never want to let them down. You don't think clearly when you're concussed. So as soon as it's identified, be it one of your fellow players, or be it someone in the stand, or be it an independent doctor, or be it your own medical team, immediately off HIA, and the protocol is in place to not let any of those slip through the cracks.
The more you read and hear about it, and the more the players who were involved at that time come out and talk about it, like there's been several of them this week. Will Greenwood, I heard during the week, talking about the level of intensity of Leicester training in the late 90s and 2000s. He said at times training was regularly tougher than many of the international tests that he played. It's frightening stuff, really. And we've had conversations.
That was crazy stuff, though, as well, Adrian. It really was. If you think back, and we were only finding our feet in understanding what the expectation was from professionalism. Before that, you're coming, 5-6 years into the game turning pro. Before that, people had, different professions, went and trained a couple of nights a week, and so it was okay, perhaps, to do a bit of physical contact in those training sessions, and then playing a game at the weekend. Whereas the coaches, and there's no finger pointing at all, the coaches, I guess, wouldn't have had an appreciation for how much or how little contact you needed to take to get you ready for the weekend. I remember back the Lions tour in 2001, we did an insane amount of contact training. We were exhausted. We were on the pitch a couple of times a week for two-hour sessions each day, Monday, Tuesday. And by the time we got to the end of the tour, we were exhausted. Phil Larder, the English coach that won the World Cup with England in 2003, they were renowned for having a 10-minute contact session on a Thursday morning before playing a test match on a Saturday. That sort of stuff is unthinkable, unheard of now.
Right.
The level of contact at training has been reduced significantly, almost to the point of it being zero at times throughout the season. It's all now about body height, about tackle technique, about simulation, but not actually following through with the contacts, because you can't burn the candle, so to speak, at both ends of training hard physically and then playing the game. Something's got to give. So I do feel as though we've made huge inroads in that regard with being able to preserve bodies, and as a result, the positive knock-on effect to that is that we've got less collisions, and so as a result, you have less concussions.
Yeah, and coaches' understanding of it is probably key and all that, because I mean, without singling him out, but I can't imagine that Cheika was arriving in a training at any point during the week and saying, all right, lads, take the foot off the gas a little bit today.
He was one of the first coaches, actually. Contrary to that, he was one of the first coaches that was big on simulation. And I think he probably had an understanding. Maybe that first year he got stuck into us a little bit, but then once he knew that he'd broken us to rebuild us back up again, kind of deconstruct to reconstruct, and that was more of a mental thing rather than a physical thing, I think there was a realization that you just can't do that over a 9-10 month season. And you can probably front load it a little bit in August, September in advance of playing games. But when the games are coming thick and fast, you're playing, every week. Pretty much these days, you play every single week with the odd, week off in the middle of the season. For some players will go on and play internationally. There has to be a moment in time where there's a realization bodies are going to break down, and I'm not going to have my best players for the business end of the season if I keep hammering away at them. And it just took a while for the penny to drop on that front. And I would say that Cheika was one of the first ones to get that.
Yeah. In terms of where it's at the minute, I know that obviously the former Irish Dr. Barry O'Driscoll, and I'm probably butchering what actually happened here a number of years ago, left World Rugby because he was frustrated, I think, with the levels of progression that was been made around this entire topic. So I think everybody accepts that it is safer now than it was then. Is it safe enough still?
I think it's always a work in progress, isn't it? And I think if you were having these players bringing a case against World Rugby and against the game, having played in the last couple of years, you'd be all the more fearful. I think the fact that it does feel like it was a different time, and there was perhaps less duty of care to those players on reflection, because they were able to go, and the sense of feeling was that you were meant to behave in a particular way. And I don't know whose fault that is. I don't know if you can point the finger at World Rugby or at unions. Is that a personal thing that, the responsibility ultimately lies with you about your own health and safety? I'm not sure. I guess that'll play out over the course of the next number of months and maybe even years. But I do feel as though professional rugby is a very tough physical game. It's not for the faint-hearted. It's really not. And it's not going to be for everyone. So, you will hope that, underage rugby is still at a level where these sort of issues aren't going to arise to the same degree as it is professional level. And then, ultimately the situation of only the very best of those players will have the opportunity to progress into professional rugby. And then maybe it won't be for some of them.
Yeah. It's an impossible question to answer in some ways, but if you were looking at it all over again now, would you any second thoughts about getting involved in it or getting your kids involved in it? Or are you thinking that actually the game is in a probably maybe a better place now, or definitely a better place now than when you get into it? Would you, I said an impossible question in some ways, but have you given that any thought?
Yeah. I think, I have. Like my kids I don't think my daughter's going to have much interest in rugby, to be honest with you. My boy loves watching it. He loves playing in the garden and at home, and it's all about the contact. I was definitely not like that as a kid. I was about, the attacking rugby and not so much the defensive stuff. He's opposite to me in that regard. But I would hope that, things taught the right way and all the positives that come from rugby as well. And that's why I'm so deliberate in making my point of seeing the comparables between, yes, the negativity around this, but all the positives you do gain from the game as well. Do they balance themselves out? I certainly hope they do. And for me, would I go back and change anything that I did? I would hope that I'd make some better decisions when I knew that I wasn't right to get off the field. But again, like I said, you don't think clearly when you're out on the park and you get a knock to the head. That's why the responsibility is with your teammates and with the medics that are playing alongside and part of your environment.
I saw that there was, saw a number today, there was between 50 and 70 concussions each season in Ireland over the last 5 seasons, and that there'd been a reduction in the number of concussive events since the last World Cup. So it does point that everything is headed in the right direction. What would you like to see specifically, what measures would you like to see specifically rushed in to combat this thing? And do you think it feels like a different conversation than we've been having over the last previous years? Do you feel it's an extremely pivotal moment to the point of make or break for rugby?
I don't know if it's make or break, but it does seem like a pivotal moment. It does. And I guess there's been lots to say. I think some of those points that the players mentioned have brought it in, where less contact at training. Had a list of more medical checks in advance of a season. I think, was it in the Irish Times today, Dr. Emer McSweeney was talking about a brain MOT every year. And that's sort of the problem is that sort of information to parents and people listening at home is scary. Yeah. But it's an MOT no different than an MOT on the rest of your body, on isokinetic testing, on hamstrings, on joints and so on. This sort of thing, this sort of medical testing happens to players on a regular basis. So I guess it's just future-proofing the game to make sure that there isn't any safeguarding against any kind of future brain disease. Trying to catch any brain disease early will have a massive positive effect on the rehab and recovery of that individual the earlier it's caught. So it makes sense to have annual brain checks if this is something that has gone on in the past and it comes to light that there's going to be more cases. 100%.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, we'll absolutely be coming back to this topic. As you said, we were talking to Keith about it earlier on. We had Jamie Cudmore on last night as well, and I'm sure it's a topic we're going to come back to over the coming weeks and months. There is some rugby to be talked about, and it does feel slightly odd in the context of the conversation we've just been having. But nevertheless, the new Heineken Champions Cup season is upon us, and all 4 provinces in action this weekend. We'll start with Montpellier Leinster on Saturday night. Leinster short odds favourite. I was just looking it up before we came on air. Short odds favourites ahead of Exeter and Racing. Saracens obviously not involved. Does that feel fair enough to you? Yeah,
listen, it's you throw a net over the 3 of them. I think there's going to be very little between them, and on any given day, any of the 3 of them could beat one another. So at the very top table, which Leinster can continue to be at, I think Exeter have rightly put themselves in that position. Toulouse feel like they're back there, and Racing have definitely been there for a number of years, and again we're unfortunate losing finalists. So if it's hard to pick a winner from outside of them, such as the caliber of the those 4 squads. But I suppose you always live in hope that you might get someone new bursting through. You might see the re-emergence of some old winners, but I certainly think from an Irish perspective that Leinster hold the best chance of another Champions Cup title.
Given that the pain of last season is actually not as far away as it would normally be when they're reaching this stage, is that like the manner of it and the reaction to it? I mean, I don't know how much we can measure what they've done, the blitzing of teams across the pro rugby season, but is that something that will be used as a stoke now, given that it was so recent?
Yeah, I think you always have to use your circumstance the best way you possibly can. And if they had gone and won it, they would have been using the confidence derived from that. The fact that they were beaten by a more physically imposing team gives them food for thought for when they come up against that type of opposition again. I think you'll see elements of that in Montpellier on Saturday evening. Having looked at them, they've been pretty inconsistent this season, but yet they're an enormous pack. They're playing second rows at number 8. They are absolutely huge. So you know that it's going to be route 1 against them. And it's the one thing where Leinster have come unstuck against Saracens in the last 3 years in the final in St James's Park and last couple of months in the Aviva. Is that if you get drawn into an arm wrestle against these teams, you'll come off second best. So they've got to, I think, their way through it a little bit better and play teams slightly differently that they feel can impose themselves on them.
Yeah, we've live commentary on Sunday, Keith, with Neil Tracy on Munster against Quins. Gerry Flannery obviously goes back as Quinn's line-out coach, back to Limerick. They've been getting a lot of compliments over the last few months, Brian, about the style of way they've been playing. You might almost say it's a Leinster style. Are they a very different team from the team that he left?
I think they are a team that's definitely evolving. I think what's different about this Munster team is that finally we've seen the emergence of some of their academy coming through and being genuine contenders for a starting berth in European rugby. And when you bring back the likes of Keith Earls and Peter O'Mahony that had big performances last weekend, CJ Stander that's been a consistent performer, I think Munster are starting to shape up to being someone that can be in the conversation of contesting semi-finals and finals. It felt like they were a quarter-final team for the last few years, and they've managed to get into some semi-finals but have become badly unstuck in them. Whereas you get a sense, particularly with Healy coming in at 10 and showing great promise. They've got big headaches, picking a back three now in the coming weeks. I think their issue, though, remains in their front five. Obviously, you've got Tyke Byrne that comes back in, but it's their front five that has probably been their shortcoming in the last few seasons, and I don't know if a whole lot has changed there. That's where it's your engine room. It's where the quality possession comes from. It's where you access your line out and your scrum ball. And if you're denied that, it's very hard to go and win key European games. So I guess we'll see whether the improvement of some individual performers in that area will be enough, or whether they get to that knockout stage area again and it's just a hurdle too far.
You mentioned Ben Healy there, and there's been a lot. Gordon Darcy had an interesting piece the other week about him and his future. Who knew that the precedent had been set about dangling the carrot of a big money move away that might sort of just pique everybody's interest, albeit slightly different in this case, where he's potentially talking about an entirely different international career, obviously. But Gordon was very critical of David Nucifora and of the RFU, particularly in terms of getting the finger out. They obviously have their policies in place at the minute to reflect everything that's gone on with the world and their own approach to contract negotiations. What is your take? Do you think that looking at him, it's a player worth making an exception for, or should the RFU kind of just hold the line?
I think it's very hard to make an exception for someone like him that's relatively new on the scene, albeit he's showing great potential. I think himself and Harry Byrne are in the same conversation. They're definitely future Ireland internationals if they keep going the positive trajectory they've been on this season. But when you're looking at some of your other players that are going to be a key components to the Rugby World Cup in 2023, and making sure you hold on to them, and yet you haven't got into any contract negotiations with them either. I think the likes of Ben Healy will just have to sit and wait and be patient. He's obviously got another opportunity to play international rugby elsewhere, but you could be sure that he wants to be an Irish international. He's, I don't know, I'm not au fait with his background. Is he born and bred in Ireland? I believe he is. But,
yeah, he's Tip, I think, yeah.
He's Tip, but he wants to play for Munster first of all. I'm sure maybe he had aspirations to play for Ireland at some point, but he wants to be a Munster player, and the way they're playing at the moment, and the way that he's playing, and the confidence that his coach has instilled in him to go out and play his natural game, I think it's very exciting for him, and it feels as though Munster have the potential to develop something in the coming years, and I'm sure he'll want to be part of that. Yeah. So. It feels like this is a very unusual time, and the RFU are playing a bit of Russian roulette with with the potential for other clubs coming in and maybe getting a deal on some players that feel as though they're going to be left high and dry. It's a challenging time for the RFU and for individuals who are out of contract in the summer, but it's I guess they'll have to wait and see who gives in first and what the numbers are going to look like. You'd also imagine, considering the backlog of negotiations, that it's not going to be a quick process. So that probably means things will drag on to March, April, and that's where your bargaining power is really lessened when other teams have signed their quota of players and you're left with taking a number that you don't like, or you get no contract whatsoever. So it's not an ideal circumstance for a professional rugby player to be in, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have our main rugby man Nathan Murphy on duty for Racing Connacht as well on Sunday afternoon. He's alongside James Downey for that, and then there's obviously Ulster Toulouse. What are your picks out of those four? Ulster Toulouse, Montpellier Leinster, Racing Connacht, and Munster Harlequins.
Well, I'm just really interested to see what Ulster can do. They've shown a real peak in form since their disappointment at the end of last season, back in August. And some of their key players are back playing really well, particularly the likes of John Cooney. Coetzee is playing really well. Unfortunate for them that Billy Burns and Henderson are out, because it feels as though they're going to need to be fully stacked to take on Toulouse team that on paper looks really, really good. And not having a big crowd in Ravenhill, in the Kingspan Stadium, will be very much to Toulouse's benefit. So the problem with the current the new Champions Cup format is that you lose one game and you're under major pressure. You've got to win 3, so you got to win your home game. So I'm intrigued to see whether they can improve on some of their performances, because they're going to need to do that. Toulouse are a really coming side.
Yeah. So what are we saying? Toulouse?
I think probably Toulouse, Munster, Racing, and I don't know. I think the Montpellier game is going to be very tough. But because they haven't been good, I think Leinster might scrape it. But I think that'll be a close one.
A few injuries there as well. Might tip the balance a little bit in Montpellier's direction. All right, Brian. Good stuff. Thanks a million. Enjoy the weekend.
Thanks, Adrian. Cheers. You too.
Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.